in Cohn Stiles, a proud sponsor of this program. I asked Matt to come on because we are focusing heavily on this. I think one of the hottest political races in town is the race for sheriff. Quite frankly, I don't think Donnie Youngblood's going to have much of a problem getting reelected, but it is heated up, and he's being challenged by a 19-year veteran of the department named Justin Fleeman. He was on, and what surfaced, which could be potentially really damaging to Donnie, is a videotape from 2006 when he was running for sheriff. He was being interviewed by the Detention Officers Association and asked about, well, we only have excerpts from the tape, but in it, he was quoted as saying, financially for the county, it is better if you shoot and kill someone other than maim them for life, because financially a court might award more money to sustain and to help somebody through another 40 years of life or whatever. Technically, I will tell you that he's absolutely correct. He admitted on the program it was a boneheaded thing to say because the implication without clarification is that he's given a nod and a wink to the deputies to shoot to kill as opposed to maiming. Why is Matt Clark on? Matt Clark, Cohn Stiles, has sued the county multiple times because of infractions and misdeeds by sheriff's deputies. And in fact, one of the cases that Donnie Youngblood was talking about with the Detention Officers Association, the James Moore case, was actually handled by Cohn Stiles.
That's
Matt Clark,
correct, yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard. Good to see you.
What did you think when you heard that interview?
Well, I guess having taken Sheriff Youngblood's deposition a time or two now over the years, and having litigated a lot of these cases against the Kern County Sheriff's Department, I wasn't really surprised. I think what I was surprised was that he said those things out loud. And let me correct you if I can, in a civil way, Richard. I don't know that your statement at the outset of this is true, that it is in fact reality that killing somebody is cheaper than injuring them. That is not always the case. I mean, there are certainly instances where that may be true, but there are also instances where the loss of a loved one is far more financially onerous to the county than somebody simply being injured. So I don't want to,
but as a
accept
general,
that as an absolute
okay,
truth.
but as a general rule, it's true.
No, it's not, because it depends upon. There's so many factors. Every case is different, right? For example, if the sheriff's department was to kill me, right, and my family was to lose the next 30 years of my earnings because of that, I have I'm the sole provider for my family. That case could be worth a whole lot of money, significantly more than Sheriff Youngblood suggested, which is $3 million. So it really is a case-by-case situation. It depends on how bad someone's injured. Certainly if they're a paraplegic or quadriplegic or something of that nature, very, very expensive to care for somebody in that condition for a long period of time. But it is not a universal truth that it's cheaper to kill them. And so going back to your question, what's my reaction to having heard that? Well, having represented families that have lost loved ones due to the negligent or in some cases criminal conduct of the sheriff's department, I can tell you, they are not pleased to hear that it's cheaper to kill them, right? I mean, imagine
the families of the victims.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got 2 cases still outstanding, Richard, one of which set to go to trial the end of this month, where a sheriff's deputy was making a left turn, couldn't see traffic coming the opposite direction. It's against a red light, and killed, by all accounts, a wonderful man by the name of Larry Meharry. His family, who, by the way, I met with this morning, isn't happy about it. I mean, imagine that for a moment. I mean, how callous that sounds. It's cheaper to kill him. And when you think about it, and when you look at, let's just
that was a traffic accident, not a shooting.
Well, I understand that, but it's a mentality within that department. If you have the head of that department saying to deputies who would ultimately be underneath him, okay, that it's cheaper to kill him, doesn't that provide a mindset within the department that that frankly human life isn't worth that much?
Well, okay. In defense of Youngblood, we don't. This was an excerpt, and we haven't heard the full. When you take something out of context, you can twist it in any way. But
I'm not
even
sure.
even Donnie Youngblood
Yeah.
admitted it was a poor choice of words.
Right. I mean, look, my understanding is he was speaking to the Kern County Detention Deputies Association. This was before he was elected in '06. Clearly this is a politician at that point who, like I presume most politicians, when they're behind closed doors and speaking to a group that they want to have endorse them, you say just about anything, I guess,
Sure,
and that's what happened. But that doesn't make it right.
Right. Okay. And the James Moore case, because the Moore case was brought up in this conversation. Tell us, your firm handled this. Tell us about this case.
Well, sure. So James Moore was in the downtown jail. He was beat to death by a number of deputies. There was a lawsuit brought against the county. In addition to that, there were numerous criminal complaints filed by the Kern County District Attorney's Office. And there was one deputy who entered into a plea deal. There were two other detention deputies. Actually, I believe they were full deputies, but there were deputies who ultimately did not take a plea. They had their cases go to trial. Kern County juries convicted the both of them on felony charges. And so, I imagine that the context of this conversation that Sheriff Youngblood was having with the Detention Deputies Association back in 2006 related to that case. I could envision, some detention deputies probably not being too pleased with the fact that some of their fellow deputies at the time were subject to criminal prosecution and ultimately were prosecuted and convicted by a Kern County jury.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you, in the course of your work, can you make a judgment on culture? And I mean, is the sheriff's department worse than the police department? Is the police department worse than the sheriff's department just by sheer number of cases or incidents?
Yeah, no, that's a very difficult thing to say. I mean, look, if you want to evaluate that from sort of an empirical, 10,000-foot approach, you would look at some of the statistical information that's out there. The Guardian did an excellent series of pieces last year on the number of officer-involved shootings, the number of shooting-related deaths in this county. Per capita, we rank at the top of just about every list around, not just the country, but the world. Look what's happened. I mean, right now, as we speak, it's my understanding that the DOJ has a permanent office at the Kern County Sheriff's Office on Norris Road. So, I would ask them. I mean, they're probably
the state DOJ.
The state, right? Yeah, I mean, the states had to come in and do an investigation. I don't know what the results of that are. I don't think that it's concluded. I'm sure we'll all hear what the results are once it is concluded. But they're probably the better group to ask because they've investigated not just this local department. I mean, my cases have been primarily against the Kern County Sheriff's Department.
Okay. We're talking to Matt Clark. If you have any questions, he's a partner in Cohn Stiles about any police incidents or alleged brutality or shootings. Give us a call here at 842-5376, or you can even text us at 842-5376. Matt, what are other, if you say we're at the top in terms of things that can go wrong or shootings or whatever metrics that the Guardian used, what are other departments at the bottom doing that we're not doing? Or would you argue, if you were a cynic, maybe you would say, hey, look at our county. I mean, we're a poor county. There's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of, it's rough out there for these cops.
Well, so, I mean, if I'm addressing just the last part of your question, there are a lot of poor counties out there. Right? I mean, you're from the South, right?
Yeah.
Lots and lots of poor counties out there that don't have similar numbers to what we've got in this county. I mean, what I can comment on is that if we talk about sort of these driving cases, right, and I've been really involved in these driving cases over the years. We represented the Hyler family. I don't know if you recall that case when Deputy Swearingen doing 85 miles an hour.
Is that on North Chester?
That's on Norris.
Norris.
Doing 85 miles an hour, no lights and sirens, hits and kills Daniel Hyler and Crystal Jolly. In that case, we kind of got into the weeds with what's the Sheriff's Department's training, what are these guys supposed to be doing, was he within policy, was he not within policy? I mean, clearly in that case, he was not within policy. Then we got Nancy Garrett, who died coming home from a Dodger game, crossing through the intersection. Yeah, crossing through the intersection of China Grade Loop and North Chester. And Deputy Clerico doing 85 miles an hour, by the way, although with lights and sirens, but through a blind intersection and not following the department's training. I think that what we've learned, and the case after that, of course, is the Mahari case we were talking about just a moment ago, is that this is a training issue, right? And it's also a discipline and enforcement issue, right? If you have people driving outside of policy, you've got to do something to enforce that. And through our efforts and discovery, what's pretty clear is that at least up until the death of Nancy Garrett, very little, if anything, was being done to enforce the policies.
Okay, we're talking to Matt Clark. Let's take a break here. Matt, when we come back, you mentioned a death in custody in the Sheriff's Department, and then you mentioned traffic accidents. My question to you will be, can you tie those together? They're two different things, two different training issues. Does that point to a bigger problem, or is it just happenstance that we've had this rash of both of them?
Sure.
Okay, we'll talk to Matt Clark when we come back here on News Talk 1180, the new 96.1 KERN. Welcome back, everybody. 223. We're chatting with Matt Clark, who's a partner in Cohn Stiles, the preeminent plaintiffs attorney's firm in a town. Matt, when we left off, my question to you was about the Sheriff's Department, because you've handled a lot of cases, and primarily traffic cases there. You've had deaths at the hands of Kern County deputies, and then you had a rash, and you just cited 3 or 4 of deputies either speeding or speeding without their lights, or being in the wrong place. Can you connect those in terms of, one involves responding to a call, and one involves somebody maybe in custody. They're two different things, but do they speak to the same lack of training?
Yeah, maybe? Well, you just stole my thunder, because you used the word that I was going to use, and that's training. Training is the common thread between these things, but it also goes back to discipline. You've got to hold people accountable, right? So if you have somebody that does something that is not within the policy, right? And the county and the Sheriff's Department has policies for a reason. If you have somebody that acts outside of that policy, you've got to have a disciplinary action that corrects that behavior. And so if you're not doing that, and
how do you know that the Sheriff's Department isn't doing that? How do you know that? Do you have access to all the discipline actions?
In all fairness, I do not know as it relates to shootings and in custody deaths, because we just haven't had one of those in quite some time. What I do know in regards to the driving is that very, very little discipline was taken out. Very little in the way of enforcement of standing policies took place before the death of Nancy Garrett. And I'll use Deputy John Swearingen as a good example of that. Here's a guy, again, way outside of policy. 85 miles an hour in a 45 zone. Okay, no lights.
Where was this? What?
Norris Road.
Norris Road
kills 2 people. Had that been you or me, we're going to jail. Right. Guarantee it. We're going to jail. Okay. Not only do we talk in no jail time, had a 2-year paid vacation, and then went back to work. So what does
He's back on the force?
Yeah. So what does that say? Right? What does that say? If you're a fellow deputy, it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're not going to enforce these rules. Mm-hmm. And so. Yeah, that's the common thread. That's the connection between things.
That's interesting. But you said we haven't had an in-custody death in a while, right?
Yeah, the last one that my firm was involved in was, of course, the David Silva case.
Right.
I'm sure you're familiar with that case.
That's the one outside KMC, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And, I didn't have as much involvement in that case, so I really don't want to comment on it too much because I might say something that's incorrect. But going back to the James Moore case, that was another case where, it was a training case, right? You can't have people doing the things that they were doing, killed that guy. And I'll correct Sheriff Youngblood. He told the detention deputies it costs $3 million. That one cost $6 million. So there you go.
All right. Is the county self-insured?
Without me getting into it in a great deal of detail, what I'd say is they're self-insured to a certain limit, and then after that, there's insurance companies that are involved.
Okay.
And I would direct that question to the county.
Okay. All right. How often do you get?
Which, by the way, Richard, just so you understand, that is not uncommon for forget government entity, just large corporation. You'll have a self-insured interest, and then after that, you have insurance policy. It's sort of like the equivalent of the deductible on your auto policy.
Got it. And I didn't mean to imply otherwise. When you do you have many cases against CHP?
Well, the CHP was tangentially involved in the Silva case. Outside of that, none come to the top of my head. I will say this: if you're gonna, I see where you're going with this. If I can for a second, what I like to say is this: when's the last time that you heard in the news that a paramedic or EMT driving a hall ambulance was on the way to an emergency, lights and sirens, and had an accident in an intersection that resulted in somebody's death?
Interesting.
You don't hear about it, right?
Yeah, right.
But is it any more important than they get there? Right? Somebody's having a heart attack, pretty darn important that the paramedics get there
or
quickly.
The fire department.
That was my next example, which is when's the last time that you heard of either Bakersfield City or Kern County Fire rushing to the scene of an accident, rushing to the scene of a fire, or rushing to the scene of an emergency, lights and sirens, hits somebody in an intersection and kills them? You don't hear about it. And the reason is it doesn't happen. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it is extremely rare. And it's a training issue. And if you notice, right, you live downtown, so you should notice this, that when you see a hall ambulance come to an intersection, you see them slow
way down.
Or stop, right? And by the way, that's the Sheriff's Department's policy too.
It is.
Written policy.
That's interesting. Right. Do you have, we only have a couple minutes left here. Do you have any data that shows the number of cases that have led to settlements under Youngblood as opposed to Carl Sparks? Or
no, I don't, and I don't even know that would be a fair comparison because you're talking about a decade or more separating the two. You had the Mac Wimbush era in between them, so I'm not even sure that would be a fair comparison. But I do not have that. I mean, obviously, I know what's involved our office. Some of that I'm under confidentiality clauses I can't talk about. Others, we've talked about on this show. So,
sure, right.
But outside of the things that have been handled by my office, I don't know.
Okay, very good. Matt Clark, thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's always great having you on. Any big cases coming up?
The Meharry case goes to trial into this month, and then there's some after that. You do them one at a time, so you kind of you got one on deck maybe. But hey, real quick before we go, let me just give you a compliment. Your motto on this show is civil discourse. I got to tell you, that's really an important thing. We lack that in society these days. You don't hear a lot of civil discourse. But I thank you for promoting that.
Well, thank you, Matt. That means a lot to me. Appreciate it. Okay, when we come back, we're going to have a civil discussion with our entertainment reporter about some really civil movies coming out and some civil food we can eat while watching those movies. We're going to be right back with Movie Mike Armendariz here on News Talk 1180, the new 96.1 KERN.